Strap the old man in, his mind is completely gone. Jason shook the rein from his Italian silk suit and pointed at William in the titanium wheelchair. The two medical orderlies stepped forward. William, woolen blanket across his lap, both hands still beneath it, looked at his nephew. "His mind seems fine to me," Kenneth said from the doorway. Jason turned. "You are fired. Effective right now. Get out of this house." Kenneth did not move. He did not raise his voice. He stood with both hands behind his back. One orderly reached down and grabbed the armrest of the wheelchair. The titanium frame rang out against the marble floor, cold and sharp like a struck bell. Jason leaned forward until his face was inches from William's. "By tomorrow morning, every account, every asset, every deed in this house belongs to me." William looked at his nephew without blinking. Then he lifted both hands slowly from beneath the blanket.
Wrong move. He just handed over the keys to his own destruction. Let's get into it.
The rain hit the mansion gates like static. It had been raining since 11. By midnight, the storm had turned the estate grounds into a black mirror, slick and cold and featureless under the floodlights. William sat in the security monitoring room alone, the titanium rims of his wheelchair catching the pale blue glow of the screens. His woolen lap blanket, thick and worn and the color of old ash, was pulled tight across his legs. He watched the gates. He always watched the gates. The infant appeared on camera at 12:04. He almost missed it. The basket was dark-colored woven wicker, and it sat against the iron bars of the main gate like debris the rain had pushed there. But the motion sensor caught it. William leaned forward. He pressed the zoom control with one steady finger. The image resolved a small basket, rain-soaked, a thin cotton blanket visible through the weave, pale, moving. His jaw tightened. He did not move from the chair. He pressed the intercom instead. "Kenneth." His voice was level, quiet, deliberate. "Front gate, now." The response came in 4 seconds. "On my way, sir." William turned back to the monitors. He watched the basket. He watched the road beyond the gates. The road was empty. The rain came down in long silver curtains. Nothing moved. Then, at the far left edge of the frame, 2 red dots flared in the darkness and vanished. Taillights, expensive, wide-spaced, burning bright for 1 full second before the darkness swallowed them whole. $1 million car, gone in silence. William knew that gap between those taillights. He had seen it 100 times in the estate driveway at charity galas at the reading of his late brother's will. The gap was distinctive, deliberate, the signature of a custom build. He knew exactly who had been standing at his gate 60 seconds ago. He said nothing. His index finger rested on the arm of his wheelchair still. On screen, Kenneth appeared at the gate. He moved quickly, careful, his dark coat plastered flat against his frame by the rain. He unlatched the gate with one hand. He crouched beside the basket. William watched him lift the blanket. The infant was small, very small, and she was shaking, not crying yet, just shaking her tiny fists pressed against her chest, her mouth open in a silent effort that the camera's audio feed finally caught as a thin, fractured wail. The sound reached William through the speaker like something breaking. He pressed 2 fingers to his mouth. He breathed once slowly. Kenneth looked up at the camera. He looked directly into the lens, and his expression was flat and careful. He reached into his coat pocket. He produced a small, clear evidence bag, the kind he kept in his kit from the years before he came to work here. He crouched again. He picked something up from the wet pavement, something small, something that had fallen from the basket or from the hands that had left it there. He sealed it into the bag. He looked at the camera again. William gave one short nod. Kenneth tucked the bag into his inner coat pocket. He gathered the basket with both arms, rose from the crouch, and turned back toward the house. William stayed at the monitors for another moment. The gate hung half open in the rain. The road beyond was empty and black and perfectly, deliberately silent. He looked at the taillight's last position on the screen at the top right corner, where the timestamp read 12:06. And he thought about what kind of man drives away from a gate in a car that costs more than most people earn in a decade in the middle of a storm without looking back. He thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. He stopped thinking about it. He turned his chair toward the hallway. By the time Kenneth reached the grand foyer, William was already positioned near the fireplace. His blanket adjusted, his hands open and ready in his lap. The fire had been burning since 10. The room was warm, dry, enormous, its crystal chandeliers dark and still. At this hour, the marble floor glowing faintly orange from the hearth. Kenneth set the basket down beside William's chair with the care of a man handling evidence. The infant looked up at the firelight. She stopped shaking. Her eyes were dark and wide, and she blinked once, twice adjusting to the warmth. And then she began to cry in earnest, a full, open-throated sound that filled the room from the floor to the ceiling. William reached in. He was not practiced at this. His hands were careful, methodical, the hands of a man who had built a legal empire through precision and patience. He lifted the infant against his chest. She was very light. She was very cold. The thin cotton of her blanket was soaked through, and he could feel the cold of it against his forearm, sharp and damp. Warm blanket, he said. Quiet, even. Kenneth was already moving toward the cabinet beside the hearth. The infant cried. The fire cracked and shifted. William held her against his chest and looked at the monitors still visible through the doorway, still recording the empty gate and the empty road and the falling rain. He did not look down at the infant again. He looked at the monitors. He was thinking about the moral turpitude clause. He was thinking about the wax-sealed ledger beneath his blanket, the one he had not left unguarded since his lawyer filed the blind trust 2 years ago. He was thinking about a man who had just driven $1 million car away from his own child in a rainstorm. Kenneth returned. He held a clean, dry blanket, soft cream-colored, folded neatly. William shifted the infant. Kenneth wrapped her with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what was required and asked nothing further. The crying softened, slowed, stopped. The estate was quiet. The rain pressed at the windows in long gray sheets. William sat in the firelight with the infant warm and still against his chest, and outside the gates the road was empty, and the taillights were long gone. But the evidence bag was in Kenneth's pocket, and the storm outside was nothing compared to what was already building for the morning. Morning arrived without gentleness. The rain had stopped sometime before 6, but the sky stayed low and gray, pressing flat against the estate's upper windows like a held breath. William was already in the grand foyer when the front doors opened. He had been there since 7. The infant slept in the bassinet Kenneth had retrieved from the east storage room, positioned close to the fireplace, close to William's chair. The fire had been rebuilt. The room was warm. William sat with his blanket across his legs and the wax-sealed ledger beneath it, and his hands resting open on the armrests, and he watched the doors. Jason walked in at 8:43. He was immaculate. His Italian suit was the color of charcoal dry-cleaned, pressed to a hard edge at every seam, the lapels sitting flat and perfect against his chest. His cologne arrived before he did sharp and sterile chemical clean, the kind of scent engineered to communicate expense and erase everything underneath it. The lingering smell of last night's rain, the earthy whetstone cold that still clung faintly to the foyer's marble floor, retreated under it. Jason stepped inside and let the door fall shut behind him and stood still for 2 full seconds, surveying the room with the particular stillness of a man who had decided before entering that everything inside already belonged to him. His eyes found the bassinet. What he said is that. William said nothing. Jason crossed the foyer. He moved with deliberate ease, unhurried his leather shoes, striking the marble with a clean, even rhythm. He stopped 3 feet from the bassinet and looked down at the sleeping infant with an expression that managed to be both curious and disgusted, the look of a man encountering something unpleasant in an otherwise controlled environment. He turned to William. "Where did it come from?" "The gate," William said. "Last night." "The gate." Jason repeated the words slowly, as though tasting them for absurdity. He let out a short breath. "So someone left a stray at our gate, and you had it brought inside." He looked around the foyer. His gaze moved to Kenneth, who stood near the hallway entrance, hands clasped, expression neutral. You brought this in." Kenneth met his eyes. "Yes, sir. You brought an unknown infant into this house," Jason said, "without authorization, without medical screening, without any documentation, and placed it next to a man who cannot." He paused, precise and deliberate, feed himself. The fire cracked behind William. The infant stirred, slightly resettled, was still. William's index finger began moving. Slow, steady tracing the edge of the ledger beneath the blanket. The wax seal was raised and hard beneath his fingertip. He traced it once. He said nothing. Jason turned back to face him fully. He straightened his cuffs one and then the other, a small, practiced gesture, unhurried and deliberate. "Uncle." The word came out flat, shaped into something that sounded like courtesy and wasn't. "You can barely hold a glass of water without assistance. Your occupational therapist filed a capacity concern 6 weeks ago, and you think you can be responsible for a child." William looked at him. Not through him. At him. Direct calm, the way a man looks at a document he is reading for the second time, noting what has changed. "I'm not asking," Jason said. He was smiling now faintly at the corner of his mouth. "I'm observing. There's a difference." He walked a slow half circle around the wheelchair, unhurried, his hands loose at his sides. "You've been declining, Uncle. Everyone has noticed. The staff, your doctor. I've been..." He paused, selecting the word carefully, concerned, "for some time." He stopped in front of William again. "The child will be collected," he said. "I'll make one call. State placement is actually a very reasonable system. She'll be processed, assessed, placed in a proper environment within 24 hours. Clean, supervised, appropriate." He said each word with the satisfaction of a man who has already decided who is informing rather than proposing. "This is not a family matter. This is a liability." The infant made a small sound, not crying. A breath soft and quick, the half-conscious murmur of deep sleep. Jason's eyes moved to Kenneth again. The smile thinned. "And you," he said, "brought a biologically unknown infant into contact with a vulnerable adult in my uncle's condition. That is a safeguarding failure. That is grounds for immediate termination." He let the words sit. "I'll be reviewing your employment documentation this afternoon." Kenneth did not move. His face did not change. He looked at a point slightly above Jason's left shoulder and waited. Jason turned away. He walked toward the main office corridor, already reaching into his jacket for his phone, already composing himself into the next version of the morning's performance. He did not look back at the bassinet. He did not look back at William. William's fingers stopped moving on the ledger. He pressed his palm flat against it, feeling the weight of the document through the wool, the dense, solid presence of it beneath his hand. The wax seal pressed back against his palm, cool and unyielding. He was not angry. Anger was a fuel that burned visible and fast. What William carried instead was older, more patient, and far more structural. It did not flare. It accumulated. It had been accumulating for a very long time. He looked at the bassinet. The infant's chest rose and fell in the firelight, small and steady and entirely unaware of what had just been spoken over her head. Jason thought the silence was surrender. He had thought that before with other people in other rooms, and he had always been right. He was not right this time. He would not know that until tomorrow. But by then the walls would already be moving, and the door he had just walked through would be the one that locked behind him. The documents arrived at 10:15. Jason carried them himself. He did not send staff. He walked back into the grand foyer with a manila folder held flat against his chest, his posture deliberate and upright, a man delivering a verdict. The folder was thick. The paper inside was heavy, cream-colored, watermarked, the kind of paper that cost more per sheet than most people spent on lunch. It had the weight and texture of finality. He set the stack on the side table nearest William's chair. He did not hand it to him. He placed it where William would have to reach awkwardly to pick it up. "Emergency power of attorney," Jason said. He straightened. He smoothed the front of his jacket with one flat palm. Filed this morning, countersigned by Dr. Reeves and a second consulting physician, both licensed, both documented. He tapped the top sheet once with 2 fingers light proprietary. It's airtight, Uncle. You are legally, medically, and formally relieved of decision-making capacity as of 9 this morning. William did not reach for the documents. He looked at them. He looked at the watermark visible even from his angle, the pressed crest of a firm he did not recognize. He looked at the signatures on the bottom of the top sheet, 2 names in blue ink, neat and practiced. His face was still. The primary estate accounts, Jason continued, have been frozen pending transfer of administrative authority. Temporary measure, standard protocol under the proxy. He said it the way a contractor explains a permit routine procedural, mildly tedious. Your personal cards will also be suspended for your protection. The fire had burned low. No one had added wood. The grand foyer was cooler now, the morning light coming through the upper windows in flat gray panels, cold and directional. The crystal chandeliers hung still and dark above them, their prisms dull without direct light. Jason walked to the main office corridor entrance. He produced a key from his jacket pocket, a single key on a plain metal ring, and he turned it in the lock on the heavy oak door. The lock engaged with a hard metallic snap that traveled through the foyer's marble acoustics and landed with a clarity that was almost architectural. He turned back to William. Your staff will be reassigned pending the capacity review, he said, Kenneth included. He looked across the room at Kenneth. You can wait in the service hall. Kenneth did not move immediately. He looked at William. William gave no signal. His face was composed, neutral, closed. His right hand rested on the arm of his wheelchair. His left hand was beneath the blanket, and it was still. Kenneth walked to the service hall entrance and stopped just inside the doorway where he could still see the foyer. Jason took his phone from his jacket. He dialed. He waited 2 seconds. Yes, he said. This is Jason Hayes. I need to initiate a placement request for an abandoned infant current location, Hayes Estate. He listened. The legal guardian on site is the property owner, William Hayes, who is currently under emergency medical proxy and cannot provide appropriate care. He listened again. His free hand found his lapel. He smoothed it. Correct. Within the hour, if possible. He ended the call. He looked at William with the expression of a man who has just completed a task efficiently and is already thinking about the next one. She'll be collected by 11:30, he said. It's the right outcome. She'll be cared for properly. You understand that. The infant was awake. She had been awake for several minutes, quiet and watchful in the bassinet, her dark eyes moving between the firelight and the ceiling and the faces in the room. She made no sound. She simply watched as infants do with the full and uncomplicated attention of someone for whom every moment is equally new. William looked at her. 1 second. He looked back at Jason. Jason held the folder up. He turned it slightly in his hand, letting the watermark catch the gray window light. I want you to understand something, he said. He was not smiling now. He was precise. This is not personal. The estate requires competent administration. You built something significant here. I intend to manage it accordingly. He set the folder back down on the side table. He patted it once, a small, satisfied gesture. The proxy is a legal instrument, Uncle. It does what it does. Don't take it personally. William's left hand beneath the blanket was tracing the wax seal of the ledger again, slow, circular. The raised surface of the seal pressed into the pad of his finger with each pass, familiar, grounding, the tactile confirmation of something that existed and was real and had not changed. The frozen accounts were not the accounts. The frozen accounts were 3 secondary holdings, carefully maintained, modestly active, sufficient to appear primary to anyone who had not read the trust's deeper architecture. The real accounts, the offshore structures, the untouchable capital lived in the ledger beneath his hand. They had lived there since the day his lawyer first used the phrase moral turpitude clause in a conference room 12 years ago. and William had said quietly, "Write it in," and his lawyer had asked if he was certain, and William had said yes, and that had been the end of that conversation. He had not told Jason about the clause. He had never needed to. Jason picked up his phone again. He was already moving back toward the corridor, already transitioning into the next phase of the morning he had planned with such care. He paused at the locked office door. He looked back at his uncle settled in the wheelchair, blanket across his legs, hands folded, the picture of a man who had run out of options. "You built well, Uncle," he said. He unlocked the door. He pushed it open. "I'll take it from here." The door closed behind him. The lock did not re-engage from the inside. Jason had not noticed that. William looked at Kenneth in the service hall doorway. The corner of Kenneth's mouth was flat and hard. His hand was in his coat pocket. It had been in his coat pocket since Jason made the phone call. Jason held the paper like a crown. He had forgotten who built the kingdom, and he had forgotten something smaller but more immediately consequential. He had forgotten to check whether the office he had just locked himself into had a second phone line. It did.
Absolutely not. He's using forged medical papers to steal a billionaire's empire and throw his own flesh and blood to the state. If that were me, I would have run him over with that wheelchair the second he started gloating. Imagine being trapped in your own home, watching an arrogant brat dismantle your life while a baby cries in the background. The audacity is real.
Kenneth moved the moment the corridor fell quiet. He did not run. Running left sound on marble, and the mansion's acoustics were unforgiving, every footfall traveling upward through the stone and plaster like a signal. He walked with the measured pace of a man performing a routine errand, shoulders level, hands at his sides, his expression carrying the particular blankness of someone who has learned to be invisible in rooms where powerful people are not paying attention. He turned left at the service hall junction. He passed the linen storage. He passed the back stairwell. He stopped at the third door on the right, the security monitoring room, and he stepped inside and pulled the door closed behind him without a sound. The room was small and functional. 2 monitors, a rack of recording equipment, a rolling chair that no one had adjusted in years. The desk was scarred practical, bearing the accumulated marks of a decade of coffee cups and cable management. On the left side of the desk, bolted to the wall at an angle that made it easy to miss, if you were not specifically looking, was the analog rotary phone. It was black, heavy, and old. Its line ran independently through conduit that predated the estate's digital renovation by 15 years and had never been connected to the main network. Kenneth had known about it since his 3rd week working here. William had shown it to him without ceremony or explanation, pointing once, saying only, "That line is separate." And Kenneth had understood immediately what that meant, and had never mentioned it to anyone. He lifted the receiver. The dial tone was immediate, low, and steady, the unhurried sound of a system that did not know or care that the estate's digital network had been frozen 30 minutes ago. He dialed from memory. 7 digits, no hesitation. It rang twice. Victoria. Her voice was already alert, already moving the voice of someone who had been expecting this call and had been ready for it since before sunrise. "Green light," Kenneth said. He filed the proxy this morning. 2 physician signatures, both on documents I've never seen before today. He froze the primary accounts and locked the main office. He kept his voice low and flat, the tone of a man transmitting data rather than having a conversation. "He's called state placement for the infant." 11:30 pickup window. A brief silence on the line, not hesitation. Calculation. "The pacifier clip," Victoria said, "bagged and labeled, chain of custody intact. Send it with the gate footage from last night, timestamp at 12:04 and 12:06. "Already pulled and copied to the offline drive," Kenneth said. Another silence. Shorter. "Good." He could hear her moving, the sound of heels on a hard floor, a door, the ambient pressure of a building with people in it. "I need 12 minutes from the transport's arrival to the front door." "Can you give me 12 minutes? Kenneth thought about the medical transport. He thought about the estate's front entrance, about the distance from the gate intercom to the foyer, about the orderlies' protocol for a voluntary psychiatric placement versus a contested one. "I can give you 14, he said. 12 is enough. Victoria said. "Stall the transport at the gate. Tell them there's a documentation discrepancy on the receiving paperwork. Do not let them inside the building until I call your cell." "Understood." "Kenneth." Her voice shifted, not softer exactly, but more direct, the register she used when she wanted to be certain something had landed. "Is William stable?" Kenneth looked through the monitoring room's interior window at the corridor wall, as though he could see through it to the foyer, to the fireplace, to the man in the wheelchair with the worn blanket and the sealed ledger and the infant sleeping beside him. "He's been stable since midnight," he said. "He hasn't moved from that chair." "Good," Victoria said. "Keep him calm. Don't let Jason provoke another exchange. William doesn't need to say anything else today. He hasn't said much of anything." "I know," she said. "That's exactly right." The line was quiet for a moment. Through the receiver, Kenneth could hear the city faint and continuous beneath Victoria's location traffic and distance, and the specific urban texture of a morning already fully in motion. "The moral turpitude clause," Kenneth said. It was not quite a question. "Triggered the moment paternity is confirmed," Victoria said. "The proxy dissolves. The inheritance provision activates. Everything Jason filed this morning becomes void retroactively from the moment he left that child at the gate." A pause. "He signed his own dissolution last night. He just doesn't know it yet." Kenneth said nothing. He pressed his thumb against the evidence bag in his coat pocket, feeling the small, hard shape of the pacifier clip through the plastic. It was a small object. Personalized monogram, the kind of custom accessory that cost more than it had any reason to, and was therefore the kind of thing a man like Jason bought without thinking and carried without tracking. It had fallen from his pocket in the rain, 12 hours ago, 40 feet from the basket. "I'll be at the gate by 11:15, Victoria said. "Have the drive ready." "It's ready now," Kenneth said. He heard her exhale once, sharp and satisfied, the compressed sound of a woman who has been building towards something and can see the shape of it clearly. "Tell William I said good morning." Kenneth looked at the rotary phone, at its heavy black body bolted to the wall, at the cord that ran into the conduit that ran through the walls of this building that Jason had just locked himself inside of and declared his own. "He knows," Kenneth said. He set the receiver down. The dial tone returned for a moment before he pressed the cradle and cut it off. The room was quiet. Outside, the gray morning pressed against the small, high window above the monitors. On the screens, the front gate stood open and empty, the road beyond it wet and still. Kenneth checked his watch. It was 10:51. He straightened his coat. He slid his hand over the evidence bag one more time, confirming its presence, its weight the unbroken seal. He opened the monitoring room door. He walked back into the service corridor at the same measured pace. Shoulders level, expression neutral, the unhurried walk of a man completing a routine task. All hell was about to break loose, and Kenneth was the only person in the building besides William who understood exactly what form it would take. The transport arrived at 11:22. Kenneth heard it before the gate camera caught it. The specific diesel compression of a heavy vehicle slowing at a private entrance. The hydraulic sigh of brakes, the crunch of wet gravel under commercial tires. He was already at the gate intercom before the driver reached for his radio. "Hayes Estate," Kenneth said into the panel. Flat, routine. "Medical transport, Hayes placement. We have a scheduled 11:30 pickup." Kenneth looked at the camera feed on the intercom panel's small screen. 2 men in the cab, a third visible through the vehicle's side window back compartment. The transport was white, unmarked, clinical. Through the rear window he could see the edge of a folded stretcher, its restraint straps hanging loose and ready. "There's a documentation discrepancy on the receiving paperwork," Kenneth said. "I need to verify the proxy authorization number against our internal records before I can authorize entry. Please hold." A pause from the driver. "We're on a schedule." "I understand," Kenneth said. "It will be brief." He stepped back from the intercom. He did not move toward the estate office. He moved toward the foyer doorway and stopped there where he could see William and could be seen by him, and he waited with his phone in his hand and his eyes on the front gate monitor. Inside the foyer, Jason had returned. He stood near the center of the room, his jacket still perfect, his posture still upright, the charcoal suit unmarked by the morning's work. He had heard the transport arrive. His expression carried a new quality now, something tighter and more satisfied than before, the look of a man watching a plan reach its final stage. "Tell them to come in," he said to Kenneth. "Verifying paperwork," Kenneth said. Jason's eyes narrowed. 1 second. "Open the gate." "One moment, sir." The silence that followed was the kind that has mass. It pressed against the foyer's high ceiling and bounced back down through the chandelier prisms and settled across the marble floor like a physical weight. The infant was awake in the bassinet. She was not crying, she was watching the light. William sat in his chair. He had not moved in 4 hours. His blanket was across his legs. His hands were on the armrests. His face was arranged into an expression that gave nothing and cost nothing, and communicated to anyone paying close enough attention that he was somewhere else, entirely inside something the room could not reach. Jason walked toward the bassinet. He looked down at the infant with the flat efficiency of a man completing an inventory. "She'll be better off," he said. Not to William, not to anyone specific. The words were self-addressed, the verbal signature of a man who needs to hear himself say a thing in order to believe it. William's eyes moved to him, direct, steady. He said nothing. "You can't take care of her," Jason said. He turned now facing his uncle fully, and the satisfaction in his face had sharpened into something that wanted a reaction. It was looking for one. It had been looking for one all morning and had not found it, and the absence of it was beginning to cost him something. "You can barely take care of yourself. That's not cruelty, Uncle. That's just fact." William looked at him the way a man looks at a clock, noting the time, moving on. Jason's jaw tightened. He adjusted his cuffs. He turned back toward the front entrance and raised his voice toward Kenneth. "Open the gate, now. That's a direct instruction." Kenneth's phone vibrated in his hand. He looked at the screen. He looked up at William. William saw it. His expression did not change, but his left hand beneath the blanket pressed flat against the ledger and stayed there. Kenneth pressed the intercom. "You're clear to enter. Please proceed to the main entrance." The transport moved through the gate. The diesel engine climbed in pitch as it came up the estate drive. Through the foyer's tall front windows, the white vehicle appeared broad and institutional. Its presence in the courtyard immediately wrong in the way that certain objects are wrong in certain spaces, a thing that belongs in a different kind of building entirely. The front doors opened. 2 orderlies entered. They were large, professional, unhurried. They carried the folded stretcher between them, its chrome rails catching the gray window light, its restraint strap still hanging loose. The rubber wheels touched the marble floor, and the squeak of them traveled across the room in a single sharp note. William looked at the stretcher. He looked at the wheels. He looked at the chrome. He was aware of his legs beneath the blanket, their uselessness, the particular kind of powerlessness that is not weakness, but is indistinguishable from it to everyone in the room who is not living inside it. He thought about the ledger. He thought about the claws. He thought about Victoria's voice on the phone saying 12 minutes is enough, and wondered for the first time since midnight whether it was. Had he waited too long? Had the intellect been sufficient when the body had already failed him at every physical threshold? The proxy was signed, the accounts were frozen, the transport was inside the gate, the orderlies were crossing his floor with a stretcher and loose restraints and the whole terrible legitimate appearance of due process. Was the trap already set, or had he miscalculated the timing by a margin too small to see and too large to survive? The first orderly reached the wheelchair. He put his hand on the armrest. William did not flinch. He did not speak. He looked straight ahead at the fireplace, at the low fire, at the infant and the bassinet beside it, and he held the ledger beneath his blanket with both hands, and he waited. And then from somewhere beyond the front doors, beyond the courtyard, beyond the estate gates, a different kind of sound cut through the morning. Not the transport's diesel compression, not the foyer's marble silence. A siren. Sharp rising, authoritative, the sound of a police cruiser moving fast and getting closer and the orderly's hand on the armrest went very still. The doors opened before the siren stopped. Victoria came through first. She moved the way she always moved, fast and exact, her designer trench coat cutting a clean line through the disordered space of the foyer, its tailored edge sharp against the rumpled uniforms of the orderlies and the clinical white of the transport crew. 2 uniformed officers followed her, then a third. Their tactical flashlights swept the room in short, controlled arcs, white beams crossing the crystal chandeliers, bouncing off the marble, finding faces and holding them. The orderly's hand came off William's armrest. Victoria did not look at William yet. She looked at the lead orderly. "Step back from the chair," she said. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. It had the quality of something that had been prepared and was now simply being deployed. "You are operating under a fraudulent proxy instrument. Any further physical contact with the patient constitutes unlawful restraint." The orderly stepped back. He looked at his colleague. His colleague looked at the officers. Jason had not moved from the center of the foyer. He stood with his jacket still perfect and his posture still upright and his face arranged into an expression of controlled authority that was beginning at its edges to cost him visible effort. "This is a legally sanctioned medical procedure," he said. He directed it at the nearest officer. "I have power of attorney filed this morning, countersigned by 2 licensed physicians. Whatever she's carrying is superseded." Victoria turned to face him for the first time. She reached into the leather document case under her arm. She produced a single folded paper, crisp official, bearing the court's stamp in blue ink at the top right corner. She crossed the foyer in 8 steps and placed it against Jason's chest, flat, palm, deliberate, the way you place something against a surface you want it to stick to. "Emergency injunction," she said. "Signed 40 minutes ago by Judge Harlan in the 3rd District. It suspends the proxy instrument pending forensic review of the countersigning physician's credentials." She held his gaze. "Dr. Reeves surrendered his license in March. The second signature belongs to a man who retired from practice in 2019 and has been deceased since February." She paused. "The documents you filed this morning are fraudulent, Jason. Every action taken under them is void." Jason looked down at the paper against his chest. His hand came up and took it. He read. His eyes moved across the lines with the focused intensity of a man looking for the error in someone else's work and not finding it. "There's more," Victoria said. She reached into the document case again. She produced a second paper. This one was thicker. A folded forensic report, its header bearing the logo of a certified DNA analysis laboratory. She looked at it for one moment. She looked at Jason. She held it out. He did not take it. She set it on the side table beside the fraudulent proxy, beside the watermarked paper Jason had padded with such satisfaction 2 hours ago, and she opened it flat. "Rapid DNA analysis," she said. "Completed at 7:40 this morning. Sample source a personalized pacifier clip recovered from the estate's main gate at 12:06 this morning. Chain of custody documented from recovery to analysis." She looked at him steadily. "The infant in that bassinet is your biological daughter. The match is 99.9%. There is no margin in that number that helps you." The foyer was completely still. The officers had stopped moving. The orderlies stood near the stretcher, their hands at their sides, watching. The infant, who had been in quiet since the doors opened, made a small sound, a single soft exhale, and was still again. Kenneth stood in the service hall doorway. He had been there since Victoria entered. He had not moved and had not spoken. He watched Jason's face with the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for a specific moment and is now giving it his full attention. Jason's hand holding the injunction dropped slightly. His posture did not collapse. It was more precise than that. It recalibrated a millimeter at a time, as though his body was attempting to redistribute the weight of what had just been said without letting the adjustment show. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved from the DNA report to Victoria, to the officers, to William. William had not moved. He sat in his chair with his blanket across his legs and his hands on the armrests. And he looked at his nephew with the same expression he had worn all morning, direct, even the gaze of a man reading a document for the second time, and finding it exactly as he expected. He did not say, "I told you." He did not say anything. "Paternity alone," Jason said. His voice was controlled, careful, a man buying time with precision. "Paternity is a personal matter. It doesn't touch the proxy. It doesn't touch the estate." Victoria looked at him. "No," she said. "It doesn't." She paused. 1 second. 2. The timing of someone who knows exactly what comes next and is choosing when to release it. But abandonment does. She reached into the document case one final time. She produced a bound copy of the trust instrument, its cover page bearing the Hayes estate seal and the filing date from 12 years prior. She opened it to a tabbed page near the center. She did not hand it to Jason. She held it so he could read it from where he stood. "Section 14, she said. "The moral turpitude clause. Any named beneficiary who commits an act of willful child abandonment, documented and verified, is immediately and permanently divested of all inheritance rights, all proxy authority, and all claims against the estate's primary trust structures." She closed the document. "You left your daughter at this gate at 12:04 this morning. It is on camera. Your pacifier clip is on the pavement beside her basket. Your DNA is in her file." She looked at him with an expression that was not unkind and not merciful. "You triggered the clause yourself, Jason, last night, in the rain." Jason stared at the DNA report on the side table. He stared at it the way a man stares at something he cannot recategorize, that refuses to become anything other than what it is. The nearest officer moved forward. He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. The sound of it, small and metallic, traveled across the marble floor and reached Jason before the officer did. Jason looked up. For the first time all morning, the suit was not enough. The cologne was not enough. The posture and the cuffs and the watermarked paper and the carefully constructed architecture of the morning he had planned so precisely, none of it was enough, and the room could see that now. And he knew the room could see it. He stared at the DNA results, entirely unaware even now that paternity was only the first bomb to drop. The clause was the second. And the third, the offshore ledger still warm beneath William's blanket, had not even been mentioned yet. The handcuffs closed around Jason's wrists at 11:41. The sound was small, precise. A single metallic click and then a second, and the custom silk of Jason's charcoal sleeves bunched slightly at the cuffs where the steel bit in, wrinkling the pressed seams, disrupting the clean line that had been maintained so carefully through every hour of the morning. Jason looked down at his wrists. He looked at the steel. He looked at the silk. He did not speak. The lead officer read the charges in a level, practiced voice. Felony child endangerment, fraud in the first degree, forgery of legal instruments. Each charge landed in the foyer's marble acoustics and stayed there clean and permanent the way certain sounds do in large rooms. Victoria stood to the right and slightly behind the officer, her document case closed now, her hands still. She watched Jason's face with the focused patience of a woman who has carried something heavy for a long time and has just set it down. Kenneth had not moved from the service hall doorway. William had not moved from his chair. Jason raised his eyes from his wrists. He looked at his uncle. His expression had passed through several configurations in the last 4 minutes: shock, then calculation, then something that wanted to be contempt, and could not quite assemble itself into the right shape. What remained was simpler and more honest than anything he had shown all morning. He was looking at William the way a man looks at a structure he thought he understood and has just discovered he was inside of. "The accounts," he said. His voice was still controlled, still precise. It was all he had left. "The primary accounts are frozen. Whatever she's claiming about the trust, the liquid capital, is inaccessible. You can't operate the estate. You can't pay staff. You can't—" He stopped. He started again. The proxy froze everything. William looked at him. He reached beneath the blanket with his left hand. He lifted it slowly, the heavy wax-sealed ledger, its cover worn and dark with handling its seal intact, the pressed crest of his lawyer's firm still crisp and unbroken at the center. He set it on his lap in the open where everyone in the room could see it. "The primary accounts," William said, "are decoys." His voice was quiet, even, the first full sentence he had spoken in hours. 3 secondary holdings, modestly active, sufficient to appear primary. He looked at Jason. "You froze shadows." Jason stared at the ledger. "The estate's capital," William continued, "has been held in offshore trust structures since the blind trust was filed 12 years ago. That ledger contains the access architecture, every account, every instrument, every transfer protocol." He set his hand flat on the cover. "It has been under this blanket since you walked through my door this morning." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. The earlier silences had been taut, pressurized, full of things being withheld. This one was open, resolved. The silence of a mechanism that has completed its function and gone still. Victoria stepped forward. She took the ledger from William's lap with both hands carefully and carried it to the side table where she set it beside the injunction and the DNA report and the fraudulent proxy. She opened it to the first tabbed page. She looked at the lead officer. "The estate's legal and financial authority reverts in full to William Hayes effective immediately under Section 14's activation clause. I'll have the offshore trust confirmation transmitted to your department within the hour." The officer nodded. He looked at Jason. "We'll need you to come with us." Jason did not move immediately. He looked at the ledger. He looked at the DNA report beside it. He looked at the fraudulent proxy, his watermarked paper, its crisp authority entirely collapsed now, lying flat and useless between documents that had been built carefully and patiently over years to outlast it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at William. "You knew," Jason said. "You knew last night." William said nothing. "The whole morning. You sat there and you let me—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. He looked away from his uncle and looked at the floor and looked at the handcuffs and looked at nothing in particular. "You knew before I walked in the door." William looked at him steadily. "I knew at 12:06, he said. "When Kenneth bagged the clip." Jason closed his eyes. 1 second. He opened them. The officer's hand came to his elbow, not forceful, directional, and Jason moved with it toward the front doors without further resistance. The silk suit caught the gray window light one final time as he passed through the foyer's entrance. Its surface still immaculate. Its seams still pressed, wearing its perfection now like an irony. The front doors opened. The cold air came through. Kenneth moved then. He walked from the service hall doorway through the foyer and out through the front entrance without hurrying. He descended the estate steps to the courtyard. He walked to the main gate and he opened it, both panels wide, the iron swinging back on its hinges with a low resonant sound that traveled across the wet gravel and up the steps and into the foyer where William could hear it. The police cruiser was parked on the far side of the gate. The officer guided Jason through the courtyard, through the open gate, and to the rear door of the cruiser. The rain had started again, fine and cold, the kind that accumulates without announcing itself. It landed on Jason's charcoal suit and darkened the fabric at the shoulders and caught in his hair. He did not look back at the estate as the door closed behind him. Kenneth stood at the open gate and watched the cruiser pull away. Inside, Victoria was speaking quietly with the remaining officer, transferring documents, establishing the formal record. The orderlies had taken the stretcher back to the transport. The transport was already reversing down the drive. The foyer was emptying of the morning's personnel the way a stage empties after the final act efficiently without ceremony. William turned his chair toward the bassinet. The infant was awake. She had been awake through all of it, through the charges and the ledger and the claws and the cuffs, watchful and unhurried in the bassinet, her dark eyes moving between the firelight and the faces and the ceiling, with the complete, uncomplicated attention she had given everything since Kenneth carried her in from the rain. She looked at William now. Her hands opened and closed slowly, the small, reflexive motion of an infant reaching toward warmth. William reached into the bassinet. His hands were careful, methodical, the precision of a man who does everything with the same deliberate attention legal documents or a child's weight. It made no difference. He lifted her against his chest. She was warm now, fully warm, the cold of the midnight rain entirely gone from her. She settled against him and made a soft sound, low and rhythmic, the almost sound of sleep returning. William looked down at her. He looked at her for a long time. Outside, the rain came down clean and steady on the estate grounds, on the iron gates, on the empty driveway, where Jason's taillights had burned and vanished 11 hours ago. Kenneth stood at the open gate with his hand on the iron panel looking down the road, making certain. The empire was in the right hands. The child was warm. The gate stood open behind Kenneth as the cruiser disappeared around the bend, and William looked down at the sleeping infant in his lap, and the morning was finally completely over. Made up. But that feeling of watching a helpless victim completely decimate an arrogant bully using nothing but pure intellect and airtight law, I felt my own blood pressure drop when those cuffs clicked. How would you have handled Jason if he walked into your house? Drop a comment. Like, share, subscribe? Simple.